Okay, we are moving back to talking about European art, and we have three different sections or three different time periods we're going to be covering for medieval art. The medieval period lasts for about 1,000 years, and it's pretty hard to condense 1,000 years into one screencast. So I'm going to cover the periods up to 1,000, and then after that we'll go into the Romanesque. So I'll do a screencast on the Romanesque for historical background and stylistic, and then I'll do Gothic, which also with historical and stylistic. Okay, but we're going to start off with the Middle Ages period, which is the medieval. And as the Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century, it was replaced by people Romans and Greeks called barbarians, since they could only barble the Greek and Latin language. So far, we've seen barbarians represented in Roman art. We've seen, for example, the picture up on the right side is the dying Gaul, and that was in Greek art. And then Trajan's column on the left in Roman art, we see the defeat of the Dacians, which was considered a barbarian tribe. So now we're going to flip that. We're going to move on from seeing what the art was of the Romans and move on to see what the art was of the so called barbarians. So the Middle Ages and medieval period is the 1,000 year period between the dissolution of the Roman Empire in the 5th century to the beginning of the Florentine Renaissance in the 15th century. And that term the term Renaissance was, they see this period that preceded it, the medieval period, as a period of a dark age of ignorance, decline, and barbarism. And that stood in stark contrast to what the Florentines believed was their own golden age or a rebirth of classical ideas. But in reality, this period of the Middle Ages had lots of creativity, innovation, and new ideas. So the Middle Ages is divided into three periods, and we use three different terms for it. For medieval, it ends in the year 1000, and we'll talk about why it ended in that year when we get there. Then we'll have Romanesque between the 11th and 12th centuries, and then Gothic between the 12th and the 15th centuries. Okay, for historical context, first of all, the Romans are going to be replaced by barbarian tribes. The Ostrogoths, or the Eastern Goth, deposed the last Roman emperor in 476. And the social organization, is based on tribal loyalties. They lived in villages, hunted and fished, and raised some herds and agriculture. And they began to come into confrontation with the Roman Empire when they began to seek new land as their population expanded. The barbarians are going to eventually convert to Christianity, and as early as 345, the Goths adopted what's called Arian Christianity, Arian, which doesn't see Christ as divine or co equal with God, but then in 589 they adopted Roman Christianity, which does. Okay, churches also become the key patrons in the art. And going back to the different groups, the Franks will convert to Roman Christianity in 496, and that begins an alliance between the French kings and the Pope. Kings and nobles defended the claim of the Catholic Church, and the Pope in turn validated their authority. As the wealth of the as the wealth and influence increased throughout Europe, the church emerged as the principal patron of the arts. Church commissioned buildings and equipment, including altars, altar vessels, crosses, candlesticks, reliquaries, that's spelled Reliquaries, which are containers for the remains of saints. They also made vestments, which are ritual garments, and images of Christian symbols and stories and copied of sacred texts such as the Gospels. In the Middle Ages, oh, sorry, let me go back. In the Middle Ages, across European monasteries, they became principal places of art and learning. While prayer and acts of mercy were their primary occupation, some of the talented monks and nuns also worked as painters, jewelers, carvers, weavers, and embroiderers. Okay, stylistic characteristics for the different groups. The first, we have the Vikings, which were a Germanic group. They, in their style, they used zoomorphic forms. A lot of this, the Vikings were a migratory group. They led a migratory lifestyle. So we really see a blend of styles from pagan and Christian past, but new styles are going to be born as a result. So first we have the zoomorphic, which represents animal forms. Then we have cloisonne, it's spelled Cloisonne, and that's a technique for decorating metalwork that would be inlaid with gems or stones. And then there's utilitarian, which would be pottery and weaving and wool work that is going to actually be used in everyday life. Also, metal tools, weapons, and jewelry that was used on a regular basis. Let me put all this up just so you guys can see it. Okay, going back. Okay, so, and then lastly, the art that we're going to be talking about is going to be illuminated manuscripts. Gospel books were essential not just for spiritual and liturgical life within monasteries, but also critical for missionary activity, as the gospel book was required at each new foundation. The illuminated manuscripts were often bound in gold and jeweled covers. They were placed at the altars of churches, carried at processions, and even thought to protect parishioners of the church from all types of misfortune. Such works were produced by monks in scriptoria workshops within the monastery. Work was normally divided between the scribes who copied the texts and then the artists who decorated the pages. Okay, so what you can see on the slide right here, we've got the different groups. So I already talked about the Vikings. Hiberno-Saxon is going to be a mix of Christian and Germanic tribes, and we see ornamentalized vegetation, the interlace, zoomorphic, and very utilitarian. The reason why the utilitarian is important for both Viking and Hiberno-Saxon is the fact that they still were a migratory group. It wasn't until a little bit later that, so most of their art is going to be portable. It's not until later that we start seeing larger scale art when they stop being migratory. Then we have the Carolingian, which is a mix of Christian, Germanic, and classical features. And then the Ottonians, they are going to revive monumental sculpture and architecture. They used, like I said, illuminated manuscripts. The subject matter was generally Christian New Testament images, and figures were often shortened and highly stylized. Okay, that's it for the medieval historical context. Next, on the next screencast, I'll move on to the Romanesque. But so we're still doing context of this stuff, but maybe draw a line on your notes and then write Romanesque, highlight this period for the next screencast.